This is the story of how years of secrets unraveled in the most unexpected way. And it all started with my mom falling in love. Hi, my name's Dominique. I never thought I'd be sharing something so personal, but I feel like I need to let this out. Maybe it'll help someone understand the weight of keeping secrets. Or maybe it's just my way of finally coming to terms with it. Either way, here's my story.
It all started with my mom, Myrtle. She's always been someone I admired, strong, independent, and driven. She built a successful business from the ground up, which meant she was always busy. I never felt neglected exactly, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't sometimes wish for more of her time.
After her divorce from my dad, Colton, things were tough. He wasn't a bad person, but their relationship was anything but loving. They grew apart, arguing over everything from money to how I should be raised. My mom finally had enough and walked away. A couple of years later, she met DeWitt. He was different from my dad, calm, kind, and understanding. He had this air about him, like he'd been through his own storms and come out stronger. Turns out, he had. His marriage ended when his ex-wife cheated on him. When DeWitt and my mom started dating, I saw a side of her I hadn't seen in years. She was happy, really happy. DeWitt had a son, Herschel, who was 5 years younger than me. When our parents decided to move in together, I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't thrilled about sharing a home with someone I barely knew. But Herschel wasn't bad. Actually, he was kind of funny in a goofy way. At first, it felt like we were just two people forced into the same space. We didn't exactly hit it off as siblings. He'd hog the TV remote and I'd take forever in the bathroom just to annoy him. Typical step-sibling stuff. But then, something shifted. I can't pinpoint the exact moment. Maybe it was the time he helped me with a school project when no one else was around, or when I taught him how to tie a tie for a school dance. We started spending more time together, and slowly, we became friends. That's where it all began. I still remember the first time I met Herschel. I was 15, awkward and moody, stuck between wanting to be independent and still figuring myself out. He was 10, full of energy and curiosity, always asking a million questions about everything. At first, I thought he was annoying, like a little brother I never asked for. But then, something changed. One afternoon, we were sitting on the couch, flipping through TV channels while our parents were out. He asked me about my favorite movie, and I rolled my eyes. I didn't think he'd care. But when I told him, he listened. Really listened. And even said he wanted to watch it with me. That small moment made me see him differently. Over time, we started spending more time together. He'd sit next to me while I did homework, pretending to help, but mostly making dumb jokes to make me laugh. I'd help him with his art projects, even though I'm terrible at drawing. It wasn't anything big, just these little gestures that brought us closer. I didn't realize how much I looked forward to those moments until they were happening all the time. As we both got older, our bond shifted. It wasn't just about laughing at stupid jokes or teasing each other anymore. There was something unspoken between us, something I couldn't quite put into words. I'll never forget the trip that changed everything. Our parents had taken us to this quiet cabin in the mountains, a rare weekend where they weren't consumed by work. Herschel and I ended up exploring the woods behind the cabin together, just the two of us. It started innocently enough. We were skipping rocks by the lake, seeing who could make the most skips. I teased him for being terrible at it, and he splashed water at me. Before I knew it, we were chasing each other around, laughing so hard my stomach hurt. Then it happened. We both stopped, out of breath, standing so close I could hear his heartbeat. He looked at me, his usual goofy grin replaced with something more serious. And then, without thinking, he leaned in and kissed me. For a split second, I froze. My brain screamed that this was wrong, that I should push him away, but I didn't. I kissed him back. When we pulled away, neither of us said anything. We just stared at each other, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. I could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear I felt. But there was something else too, something we couldn't ignore. Later that night, he found me sitting alone on the porch. He sat down next to me, his hands fidgeting nervously. "I don't know what's wrong with me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't stop thinking about you." I didn't know what to say. All I could do was tell him the truth. "I feel the same way." From that moment on, we knew we had to keep it hidden. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was about protecting our family. We told ourselves it was okay because we weren't blood-related. That made it less wrong, didn't it? But the guilt never fully went away. Every stolen glance, every quick touch when no one was looking, it felt like we were walking a tightrope. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. We became experts at secrecy. If our parents walked into the room, we'd immediately put space between us. If we were texting, we'd delete the messages as soon as we sent them. We even made up fake fights to make it seem like we couldn't stand each other. But hiding something like this takes a toll. There were nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long we could keep this up. Part of me wanted to end it, to go back to being just step-siblings. But every time I saw him, all of that resolve disappeared. As we got older, it only got harder. The stakes were higher, and so were the risks. But we couldn't stop. By then, it wasn't just a secret. It was part of who we were. When my mom and DeWitt finally tied the knot, it felt like everything was falling into place. For them, at least. They were the picture-perfect couple. My mom glowed with happiness in a way I hadn't seen in years, and DeWitt seemed to bring out a softer side of her that even I didn't know existed. Our new family looked perfect on the outside, but things weren't as seamless as they seemed. Myrtle threw herself deeper into her work. She was driven, ambitious, and always chasing the next big opportunity. I admired her, but it meant she was home even less than before. DeWitt tried to fill the gaps, but he had his own commitments. That left Herschel and me alone, a lot. I'm not sure if they noticed how close we'd gotten. Maybe they assumed it was natural for step-siblings to bond. Or maybe they were just too busy to see it. But there were moments when I caught my mom looking at us, a flicker of something in her eyes. Doubt, maybe? Curiosity? Still, she never said anything outright. I told myself it was fine, that she didn't suspect a thing. But deep down, I think we both knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. There's one night I'll never forget. It's burned into my memory like a scar. Myrtle was out of town on a business trip, and DeWitt had gone to visit some relatives. It was just me and Herschel in the house, like it had been so many times before. We were sitting on the couch, watching some mindless movie, when he leaned over and brushed a strand of hair out of my face. It was such a small gesture, but it made my heart race. I could feel the pull between us, stronger than it had ever been. "I hate this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Hate what?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Hiding, pretending like I don't feel the way I do." I didn't have an answer. What could I say? That I hated it too? That I wished we could be something more even though I knew it was impossible? Before I could think of a response, he kissed me. And for the first time, we didn't stop. I won't go into details, but that night, we crossed a line we'd never crossed before. It wasn't just about the physical connection. It was the emotions, the weight of years of hidden feelings finally coming to the surface. Afterward, we sat there in silence, the reality of what we'd done sinking in. I felt a strange mix of emotions, guilt, fear, love, all tangled up in a way I couldn't untangle. Herschel sat with his head in his hands, looking as conflicted as I felt. "We're going to get caught," I said, breaking the silence. "I don't care," he replied. But the look in his eyes said otherwise. Before we dive into the next part of this story, I'd like to take a quick moment to ask for your support. If you're finding this story engaging, don't forget to like the video and share it with your friends. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another gripping story like this one. Your support means everything and helps us keep bringing you these raw, emotional confessions. Thank you. It started like any other evening when we were alone. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. Herschel and I had been sitting on the living room floor, going through some old photo albums our parents had stored in a dusty cabinet. We were laughing at some of the awkward family photos, my mom in her oversized shoulder pads from the 80s, DeWitt with his terrible haircut from the early 2000s. It was one of those moments where we forgot all the complications between us and just enjoyed being together. At some point, Herschel pulled out a picture of the two of us from a family vacation years ago. "Look at this," he said, smiling. "We look so normal here, like nothing was ever complicated." I laughed, but his words hit me. He was right. In that photo, we were just step-siblings, two kids forced into a family neither of us had asked for. But now, things were so much more tangled. "Do you ever wish we could just go back to that?" I asked, half joking, half serious. He looked at me for a moment, his smile fading. "No," he said quietly. I don't want to go back to pretending." I didn't know how to respond. Before I could say anything, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His hand lingered, and I felt my breath catch. It was like the air between us shifted. Neither of us moved for a moment, but the tension was palpable. And then, as if drawn together by some invisible force, we kissed. At first, it was gentle, hesitant. But then it deepened, the weight of years of suppressed emotions coming to the surface. We didn't think. We didn't stop. It felt like the world outside of that room didn't exist. We didn't hear the front door open. "Myrtle," DeWitt's voice called from somewhere in the house, but we didn't even notice. The next sound we heard was the sharp, unmistakable gasp of my mum. We froze, pulling apart so fast it was like we'd been burned. My heart was racing as I turned to see her standing in the doorway, her suitcase still in her hand. Her face was a mix of shock, confusion, and heartbreak. "What is going on here?" she asked, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. Neither of us could speak. Herschel looked at me, panic in his eyes, but I had no answers. My mum dropped her suitcase and stepped closer, her eyes darting between us as if she were piecing together a puzzle she wished she hadn't started. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, this can't be what I think it is." Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at me. "Dominique, how could you?" "Mum, please," I started, my voice breaking. "It's not." But I didn't even know how to finish the sentence. Before I could say anything else, DeWitt walked in. His expression shifted as he took in the scene, my mum in tears, Herschel and me standing there, guilty as sin. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone wary. Myrtle turned to him, her voice trembling with rage and disbelief. "You want to know what's going on? Your son and my daughter, they're... She couldn't even say it out loud. She just broke down, covering her face with her hands. DeWitt looked at us, his face going pale as the realization hit him. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then he said quietly, "Tell me this isn't true." I couldn't look at him. I couldn't even look at Herschel. I felt the weight of their disappointment, their betrayal, crashing down on me like a tidal wave. Myrtle, still crying, turned back to us. "How long has this been going on? How could you do this to us? To our family?" Herschel tried to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not what you think. Don't you dare!" my mom snapped. "Don't you dare try to justify this!" DeWitt didn't say anything else. He just walked out of the room, leaving the rest of us standing there in the wreckage of what used to be our family. Later that night, I heard my mom and DeWitt talking in hushed voices. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught enough. She was begging him not to let this tear their marriage apart. "They're kids," she said. "They made a mistake, but we can't let this destroy everything we've built." DeWitt didn't sound convinced. "This isn't just a mistake, Myrtle. This is something else entirely." The conversation ended with no resolution, and I was left wondering what would happen next. Would they try to keep this quiet? Would they send me away? Would they separate Herschel and me for good? All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. After that night, the house felt like a battlefield. No one yelled anymore. There wasn't much left to say. Instead, it was the heavy silence that suffocated us, like we were all too scared to speak the wrong words and break what little remained of our family. My mom, Myrtle, was a shell of the woman I knew. Her strength, the resilience I had admired my whole life, seemed to crumble under the weight of what she had discovered. She couldn't look at me without her eyes filling with tears. It wasn't just anger. It was heartbreak, betrayal, disappointment. I had let her down in the worst way imaginable. DeWitt was different. He didn't cry, didn't yell. He just avoided us. He spent more time at work or locked in the study. Every once in a while, I'd catch him staring into space, lost in thought. I knew he was grappling with something big. His role as a father to both Herschel and me, the family he thought he had built, and the chaos we had created. Herschel barely left his room. We didn't talk. Not because we didn't want to, but because we couldn't. There was no fixing what had been broken, and we both knew it. As for me, I felt everything all at once. Guilt, shame, fear, and love. Yes, love. Even after everything, I couldn't erase the feelings I had for Herschel, and that made it so much worse. One night, my mom finally broke the silence. She sat me down at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she tried to find the right words. "Dominique," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to understand. How could this happen?" I wanted to explain, but how do you put years of tangled emotions into words? "I don't know, Mom," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I loved him." Her face twisted in pain at my confession. "That's not love, Dominique. It can't be. Love doesn't destroy families." Eventually, Myrtle and DeWitt sat down to figure out what to do. I wasn't part of that conversation, but I overheard bits and pieces through the thin walls. They didn't want to divorce. Both of them had been through that before, and they didn't want to put the family through it again. But staying together under the same roof wasn't an option either. The tension was too much, the wounds too fresh, so they made a choice. DeWitt would move out temporarily. They'd live separately, at least for a while, to give everyone space and to ensure that Herschel and I wouldn't have the chance to be alone again. When my mom told me, her voice was firm, but her eyes were heavy with sadness. "This is the only way," she said. "I can't trust either of you right now, and I need time to figure out how to forgive you if I can." Herschel and I were given strict boundaries. We couldn't see each other, couldn't talk, couldn't even text. It was like cutting off a part of myself, but I understood. It was necessary. For months, we lived like strangers in the same house. Then one day, Herschel left to live with his dad. I didn't get to say goodbye. Myrtle said it was better that way, and she was probably right. At first, I thought I couldn't survive without him. It felt like losing a piece of my heart. But as the weeks turned into months, I started to see things differently. Alone with my thoughts, I had no choice but to confront the truth of what I had done. Yes, I loved Herschel. At least I thought I did. But love isn't supposed to feel like that. It isn't supposed to come with so much guilt, so much pain. It isn't supposed to tear apart the people you care about. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that what I felt wasn't just about Herschel. It was about everything I had been missing: connection, attention, belonging. In a fractured family, we had clung to each other for comfort. But what started as comfort had turned into something dangerous, something we couldn't control. I spent a lot of nights crying, replaying every moment in my mind, wishing I could undo it all. I hated myself for what I had done to my mom, to DeWitt, to Herschel, and to our family. But at the same time, I couldn't erase the memories. They were part of me, and letting them go felt impossible. It took years for me to fully understand the gravity of it all. I realized that the feelings I had for Herschel weren't just wrong, they were harmful. They had blinded me to the damage we were causing, not just to ourselves, but to everyone around us. I haven't seen Herschel in years now. We've kept our distance, just like our parents wanted. And while part of me will always care for him, I know now that it wasn't real love. It was something else, something born out of loneliness and confusion. I still carry the guilt with me. I probably always will, but I've learned to live with it, to use it as a reminder of what happens when you let emotions take control. After months of tension and silence, my mom sat us all down. Herschel had come over with DeWitt, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we were all in the same room. It wasn't easy. No one wanted to be there, but my mom insisted. She started by saying, "We're broken, all of us, but if we want to have any chance at fixing this family, we need help." That's when she told us about therapy. She had already started going on her own, trying to process everything that happened. Now she wanted us all to go together. At first, I didn't think it would work. I didn't see how sitting in a room and talking about our feelings could undo the damage. But as the weeks went by, it started to help. Slowly, painfully, we began to unpack everything. My mom's struggles with trust, DeWitt's feelings of failure as a father, and of course the mess Herschel and I had created. The hardest part was facing Herschel in those sessions. I thought seeing him again would reignite all the feelings I'd tried so hard to suppress. But instead, it brought clarity. By the end of therapy, we both knew what we had to do. It wasn't just about fixing our family. It was about fixing ourselves. Herschel and I agreed to end whatever it was we had, for good this time. He said, "I think it's best if we keep our distance, at least for now." I nodded, tears in my eyes. Maybe forever. It was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but it was the right one. Looking back now, I realize how lost I was during those years. I didn't know how to set boundaries or confront my emotions. Instead, I buried them, and they came out in ways that hurt everyone around me. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is that love isn't just about how you feel. It's about how your actions affect the people you care about. What Herschel and I had wasn't love. It was a desperate attempt to fill the voids in our lives, to find comfort in the chaos. I've also learned the importance of honesty. If I had been honest with myself, with my mom, and with Herschel from the beginning, maybe things wouldn't have spiraled out of control. Confronting your feelings is terrifying, but hiding them only makes things worse. And boundaries? I can't stress that enough. Without them, relationships, any kind of relationship, become toxic. Herschel and I crossed lines that should have never been crossed, and it took losing everything to see that. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. It's not easy to share something so personal, but I hope it helps someone out there. Love is complicated. Mistakes are inevitable. But what really matters is how we grow from them. I'm still learning. I'm still healing. And I know my family is too. We're not perfect, but we're trying. That's all anyone can do. So, if you're going through something, whether it's guilt, heartbreak, or anything else, just remember, you're not alone. And no matter how big the mistake, there's always a chance to make things right. Thank you for being here and listening to my story. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a situation where guilt and love collided? Or had to make a tough decision for the greater good? Share your experiences or thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoy real-life confessions and intimate storytelling, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you'll never miss another story. Your support means everything, and it helps us keep creating these raw, heartfelt videos. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.